Hey, what's up, fellow believers? I'm Emmett.
I'm Joe.
And we are the UFO Bros. And we are chatting with you live tonight from the compound, the facility. And we are indeed being patrolled again. You'll hear the trucks drive by periodically, so we do apologize.
Which we only get about half an hour of play a night, so...
We get to be out for a half an hour, so thank God Spreaker has a free trial. But unfortunately, it only limits us to 15 minutes at a time. So
15 minutes.
If we can't get everything in, we might just have to do 2 episodes. And that's okay, because there's a lot to talk about tonight, Joe.
Oh, yes.
Bob Lazar.
Indeed.
You know what made me think of talking about Bob Lazar today?
What?
Or tonight. Is in the last podcast, you couldn't distinguish the difference between Bob Lazar and Dr. Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
And so I thought, hey, you know what? Let's enlighten our listeners and followers, as well as you, my brother Joe. Maybe it's time for you to learn a little bit about Bob Lazar. So, Bob Lazar is... Lazar, yes. We're going to kind of try to keep this as short as possible about Bob Lazar, because I also do want to talk about Element 115, which is kind of like a bigger bombshell, I think, in the ufology kind of circles. So, Bob Lazar is essentially a nuclear physicist of sorts. His background and credentials are questionable, which is why Stanton Freeman, I guess, has some friction about Bob Lazar's story. But nonetheless, he was recruited in a special program, which, funny enough, Dr. Stephen Greer calls them, USAPs, which are unacknowledged special access programs. So it was basically a situation where he was brought in, briefed on the fact that we are not alone. Short briefing. Funny enough, Bob, I guess, wasn't really that affected by the briefing. He was wondering kind of what this whole deal was about, but they were really interested in his knowledge about engines and propulsion and physics. So as he's kind of getting into this facility, he's learning by observation that he's in a situation that is very, very deep and secretive. He is... Oh, by the way, guys, we're on Snapchat. I'm sorry to be off the topic here. Joe is snapping me right now, so I got a little bit lost. But I'm coming back to Bob Lazar, who... There he goes. Yep, I got my finger up. Yep, check us out on Snapchat at UFOBROSTV. So, DJ, Joe, Donald Joe. So, Joe, here he is in this briefing room. Documents, blue file folders, I guess probably about 100 or so, that explain these beings, where they come from, which is the Zeta Reticuli star system. This is according to Bob Lazar's testimony, and that this disk that he will later on see is going to be from, apparently, technology from this star system. So they show him what he later calls the sport model, this beautiful UFO, what we would call a UFO, but it's a flying saucer. And his job is to back engineer the flight and propulsion systems of this UFO, or this flying saucer.
So he's basically going in and taking it apart and dissecting every piece.
His job was to work on an exotic propulsion system and to back engineer it, essentially. And so here he is, seeing this flying saucer, this giant disc, and not knowing, essentially, where it was from until he went inside of it. It wasn't until he stepped inside, or I guess crawled inside, more or less, this flying disc, that he realized that it wasn't from this planet. And the reason being is, I guess inside, all of the interior, including the seats, the control panels, the walls, were all very seamless. There were no seams. He said it was almost like it was like
one continuous piece of metal.
Just like one giant mold, essentially. There was no, like, beginning or end. It was very much like it was injection molded or something like that. And he said he got, like, a really ominous feeling in there, like he's not supposed to be in there. Just, he could feel like this is not for human beings. This is for smaller creatures. These are small seats. Maybe these are for children, or maybe these are for, aliens about 3 feet tall. So, for about, I think it's 4 to 6 months, he continues to make, I guess, progress on back engineering this craft's propulsion. And find out that these crafts fly, well, I guess fly is probably a bad word, but not a bad word, but an incorrect term. They use gravity and manipulate gravity. They are able to essentially manipulate gravity waves to make the disc fly. But it doesn't really fly. It's hard to explain. You guys, if you get a minute on YouTube, because I am not a nuclear physicist, nor am I a science teacher or anything like that. So
Purple rain.
Yes, purple. So get a chance, go on YouTube, check out what Bob Lazar and his very interesting yet scientific explanation of how the discs fly. It's really super cool, interesting stuff. But at the heart of it is element 115. So there's this reactor, and inside it is a wedge of an element called 115. The funny thing is, back in the 80s, when Bob Lazar made his first testimony about working at Area 51, about working at S4, by the way, which is 15 miles south of Area 51 in Groom Lake there.
Yeah.
That's where he actually technically worked, was S4. So, where was I going with it? You showed me something totally inappropriate, and I lost my train of thought. Joe, what's your thoughts on this guy's testimony? Because I was telling you about it earlier. Do you have any feedback or no? Because I know you said it sounds kind of like crazy, but to be honest with you, his story hasn't changed since the 80s. His story is very clear.
How did his story get out? How was he safe enough to say, hey, I'm going to spill my beans and roll that beautiful bean footage?
Well, listening to some of his YouTube videos, I've learned that he put the information out so that, in some ways, he feel like the American public was being defrauded and lied to, and that was totally true. But also, he knew that by putting that information out there, it would also potentially save his life. Because if, he puts the information out there and then disappears, it essentially corroborates, what he's saying. So in some way, it's a way to save himself, if you get what I'm saying. So that is initially why he put this story out there, but it's been the same story even up until recently. He did an interview and nothing has changed. He was hired. His supervisor name was Dennis. They worked on the reactor that was powered by element 115, which at the time was not on the periodic table.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the periodic table. And Bob Lazar talked about how element 115 was crucial to the flight and the propulsion and the gravity amplification of the ship, and it was a crucial...
so they actually made an element.
Well, I guess this element is wherever they're from in the Zeta Reticuli star system. Maybe it's a natural element, but for us, we were able to recently, I think it was in 2003 in Russia, in a science lab, they were able to create element 115, but it was only for like a smidge. It was only for a split second. I guess that it still corroborates the fact that there is an element 115. Bob Lazar's explanation as to why it just poofed rather than, becoming some kind of millable piece of metal or whatnot, is there are different isotopes of elements. And somewhere within these different isotopes of element 115, there is a stable place where the element is proposed to be solid. So he believes that sometime in our pretty near future, scientists will stumble upon that isotope of element 115, proving the fact that it is indeed real and that his story is real. Because I'll tell you, any new science information that has come out has only validated his story. He talks about gravity waves. In the 80s, they didn't even know if there was a gravity wave. They also proposed that gravity was a gravitron, which I guess is nonsense, because recently, just I think it was last year, Joe, that they validated that gravity is indeed a wave. They were able to measure it. So that further, again, I just think for me corroborates Bob Lazar's story. The fact that in the 80s, we were manipulating gravity waves by back engineering alien technology. Hell, Dr. Greer talks about in the 50s, we were able to have full total control over gravity. That was in the 50s.
Yeah.
And here we are in the 80s, back engineering gravity control devices. It just goes to show how compartmentalized the black operations are, the way they work. They bring you in, you work in such a micro-limited scope. You don't get a chance to really work with other people. You don't share your knowledge. It's just a few people literally working on a very specific sort of thing. And nobody gets to share anything. So this amazing, exotic, otherworldly technology isn't getting the type of scientific analysis it needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do you guys think? We're on Patreon if you want to support us. But we're also chatting on Spreaker right now, so you can log into the app. Come chat with us. We're on here. Say hello. We're talking about Bob Lazar, Element 115, excuse me, and other things related to that. So, like gravity waves, for example, blows my mind the fact that we were able to identify gravity waves. Back in the 80s, back in the 90s, we didn't know what it was. Now we know gravity is indeed a wave.
But one thing, too, is that we'll be able, like, this technology, you know, here in the future, we'll be able to easily dissect it, you know, in the future because of all the technology advances and everything. You know, maybe like another 10 years. Might be easier to dissect that down into something that we can maybe...
Well, I'm waiting for them to... Look, here's the thing. That sort of technology has already been dispersed among, like, the military-industrial type complex. Now it needs to be distributed to the masses, to the people, that sort of technology. And I think that was the thing that bugged Bob Lazar the most. I think that was the thing that pushed him to come out with George Knapp back in the 80s, say what he had to say on, you know, local news. At first he did it like incognito, but then he came out again and validated his story. So thanks, guys, so much for listening to us tonight.
Yes,
we're at like less than a minute and a half, so we want to make sure that we wrap this up, letting you know that we are only limited to 15 minutes. So thanks for listening. You can find us on Instagram at UFOBROSTV. Twitter is at UF0BrosTV, because Twitter is an a-hole. Facebook.com/UFOBrosTV, and now on Snapchat at UFOBrosTV. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us tonight. We hope you have a great evening, and we will chat you up at the next podcast. I'm Emmett.
I'm Joe.
And we are the UFO Bros.